So we're going to take this for a ride. We're going to read the spark plugs. And we're going to look at the plugs, and we're going to use what we learned from looking at the plugs to decide how to rejet the carb. And then after I rejet the carb, I'll take it for another ride and read the plugs again. All right, here we go. Bike's running awful good. Maybe she don't need to be rejetted at all. We'll see. Let's see if she'll run with the fuel enrichener off. She smells awful rich. And she smells awful rich because I got the fuel enrichener at about half. So it's giving it extra fuel to keep it running. Which tells me I need to adjust my idle. And you do want it up to operating temperature before you set the idle. Let's adjust that idle a bit. Seems nice and happy. Let's run her around the block another time or two. suspension feels great. I mean, you know, feels just like it should. Feels just like an older Harley Davidson touring bike. All right, we're back from our road test. I made a mistake. I had shown a set of spark plugs in another video. They were the plugs that came out of the Sportster. These are the spark plugs that came out of the Electroglide. And I put new plugs in it. And I just took it for a ride so I can read the plugs. And now we'll pull the plugs out of this bike, the new ones that I had just put in after I've ridden it, to see how rich we're running and how I want to rejet the carb. All right, these are the brand new plugs I put in before the ride. And it actually looks like it's running a little lean. Doesn't smell like it's running lean though. You can see that they had a lot of carbon, and that's probably from running the fuel enrichment circuit until it warmed up, and then they cleaned up after I rode it. So I think I need to ride it a little more before I decide, because this is the rear cylinder. And this is the front cylinder. And I had the idle adjusted too low, and it didn't want to idle without the fuel enrichment circuit turned on quite a lot. So now that I've cranked the idle up a little bit, we'll have another ride and see how she does, and check them again after that. So I'll be back. Oh, what a great day. Tomorrow being New Year's Day, I think I need to take the Pursuit out tomorrow if the weather's good. If we look, we can see the electrode and the end of the plug itself are starting to burn off real clean. And after my road test yesterday, the first one, the plugs were white. Then I brought it back here and let it idle after I rode it again. So it looks like my idle circuit's rich, and my intermediate circuit's probably about right. And I think my main jet is lean, because I just ran it on the lift at 2,500 RPM for a few minutes, 2,500 to 3,000. And it's starting to clean the carbon out of the plugs, which would be good, except that lean is bad. It makes it run too hot, and you're not getting quite the performance you should. So here's my other spark plug. This one's actually starting to clean up a lot more. So I think the main jet's lean, intermediate's fine, and idle's really rich. So The reason idle might be really rich is because it's cold and I've had to use the fuel enrichener, because these don't have a choke. These S&S carbs do not have a choke. They have a fuel enrichener circuit, and it makes it run really rich to get it started. And if you leave that on, it'll continue to run really rich and it'll make your spark plugs black. So once I got it warmed up enough to idle and closed that, and actually turn the idle up just a little bit, it'll run on the idle circuit, and I could smell in the exhaust that the idle circuit was rich. So there's, you probably can't see it in there, but there's an idle mixture screw. Actually, my finger's pointed right at it. And the way the idle mixture screw works is it controls how much fuel is going into the carb at idle. So if you turn it clockwise and tighten the screw, it gets less fuel. If you turn it counterclockwise and loosen the screw, it gets more fuel. So I gave it just a tiny bit of a turn because there's kind of a range. There's a big adjustment procedure and there's a million videos on it, so I'm not going to show that here. But you can back that screw off or tighten that screw up a little bit and fine-tune your idle fuel. And if you go a little bit too far either way, the bike won't idle. So I turned it a quarter turn clockwise, tightened it until it smelled right, because, you know, it's what I got to go on. This doesn't have oxygen sensors, and I don't have a gas analyzer. So I turned it a quarter turn. It smelled right at idle with it idling. I turned my idle up just a hair again because these want to idle at right around 1,000 RPM. I like it to idle about 900. And you can turn the idle down and give it that lumpy Harley-Davidson idle, but the problem with that is the slower you turn the engine, the less fuel or the less oil pressure you get. And you can damage the bottom end of the engine for lack of oil pressure at idle if you turn it down too much. Because you can get it to idle at probably 600, maybe 700 RPM, and it'll give you that really lumpy idle, but your oil pressure is going to be really low at that point. You're going to damage your engine. So I like it to be at, you know, about 900. Factory recommends 1,000. So that's, you know, that's pretty safe, 900 to 1,000. If you get below 900 RPM, you start to get that lumpy idle, but you also start to lose oil pressure to the bottom end. So I've got the idle adjusted where I want it. I've got the idle mixture adjusted where I want it. I think the intermediate jet is good, so I'm going to go one size bigger on the main jet because I don't want it to run too lean when I'm blazing down the highway at speed, you know, at higher RPM, because you'll wind up damaging the engine that way too. You'll burn up a valve or melt a piston or just generally do bad things because it's running too lean and running too hot. Lean equals hot. So I guess we'll press on with that. And this being a nice S&S carburetor, we don't have to remove the float bowl to replace the main jet. All we have to do is pull this drain plug and we can get the main jet out through that hole and put a new one in. So we're going to make sure our gas is off. And it is. And then we'll get something to catch our fuel in, and we'll pop that drain plug out and see what size jet's in there and put the next size up in there. All right, so here's my drain plug. We want to make sure we take a good look at that O-ring and make sure we haven't damaged it. And then this is my main jet. This one's a 70, so I'm going to put a 72 in it. All right, so here's my S&S jet kit. And a new S&S carburetor will come with a jet kit usually. So these are intermediate jets and these are main jets. Here's the 72 that I'm going to put in place of the 70 that came out of that. So here we go. They make a special tool for these but you can use a little screwdriver and be just fine. Just want to be careful not to cross thread it. And you don't have to crank these in super tight, just snug, because it's brass going into cast aluminum. And that's tight. So now I can put my drain plug back in. If I can put my drain plug back in. There it goes. And again, doesn't have to be super tight. I just don't want it to leak or rattle loose. So that's plenty. And now I can put my air cleaner back on. Now, if you have to replace your intermediate jet, you got to drop the float bowl. And that's a bit more involved. And the screws on the float bowl are a pain in the ass to get to with the carburetor on the bike, but it can be done. Lowbrow Customs sells some cool extended float bowl bolts that take a 5/16 wrench, and it makes it a lot easier to drop the float bowl if you expect to be rejetting frequently. But generally, once you've got the carb dialed in and set up how you want it, you don't really have to change it. You might have to tweak the idle a little now and then, but you really shouldn't have to mess with it once it's dialed in. Unless you're racing it, then you might want to adjust the jets more often, and then you'd want the fancy float bowl screws. So now I'm going to turn my gas on and make sure it don't leak. Gas is on. No leaks. All right, it is another day. And we're finally going to get to take our next ride so we can look at the spark plugs again and see if we've got it jetted right. It's been sitting for 2 days and it's cold, so let's see how she starts. That's promising. Alright, fuel enrichment's all the way off. We've got a decent idle. We're at about 800 RPM, but that should come up once she warms up a little. Alright, off we go. And here are my spark plugs after the most recent rod test after putting a bigger main jet in. The color difference is important, and it doesn't come through real well on the camera. But you don't want these to be bright white because that's too lean. And obviously you don't want to be black because that's rich. What you want is a nice golden brown. And these are really close. I probably should go one size bigger on the main jet. And I will, but I'm not going to film that because we've filmed enough. I just wanted to give you the gist of how to rejet the carb and what you're looking for on the spark plugs and how tedious it can be with all the test rides. So as far as the video and what I was trying to convey, I think we're there. But I am going to go one size bigger on my main jet again and ride it again and read the plugs again. I just won't film the rest of it. Or I may film the spark plugs once I've got it totally dialed in so you can see what they're supposed to look like. But like I said, the color doesn't really come through real well on camera. So we'll see. But that's my front cylinder. That's my rear cylinder. It's actually probably pretty safe right where it is. But I'm picky, and I want them to be just a little bit better. So I am going to go one size larger with that main jet. Alright, so here we are. 2 main jets and 2 test rides later. Let's see how we did. That looks like a nice golden brown. That's what we're looking for. Let's see the rear cylinder. Yeah, I think we got it. We're there. Nice golden brown on the porcelain. And the colors don't quite come through perfectly on this camera, but we're there. We're where we want to be. And remember, these only want 8 or 9 foot-pounds. They don't have to be super tight. There she is, all done. That's it for now. Hope you all have a great day.